So nostalgia's always been a thing. I've often wondered how far back the roots of this nostalgia tree actually go. Like when I was in junior high in the mid 90s, yeah, I'm that old, the 70s culture of Dazed and Confused seemed to be in vogue. In the 80s, I think the 60s and 50s seemed to be what was happening. And in the late 90s and early 2000s, 80s culture started to become popular again, and so on and so forth. The late 80s and early 90s pastiche of VHS filters and degraded video is such a staple effect to see. I know, because I overuse it every chance I can get. What I'm getting at is, was this hankering for the days of yore such a vibe back in the 60s and the 50s and the 40s? Were kids in the 1890s like, brother, I long for the days of the 1870s once more? Was that a thing? I'm getting carried away here. What I guess I'm getting at is that nostalgia is a really strong force. A force of myth, you could say. In the current time, from soundscapes to aesthetics, throwback culture from the late 80s and 90s is all the rage. And the new team-based roguelike Mythforce is looking to nail an audience that longs for the days of the Saturday morning cartoon. Hey, that's me! Starring a cast of characters that includes 4 different classes with more coming soon, Mythforce attempts to put players into the shoes of a band of characters that go together to fight the evil forces of the universe to, what else but save the world. A fair warning before I get into my opinions and takeaways on the game, that I was sponsored to stream the game on my Twitch channel. I'm required to disclose that sort of information, but in the same breath, I can also say that I was not paid to give my opinion about the game on YouTube, nor was I paid to give a good opinion, which is a good thing either way because I guess I just really only have good things to say about Mythforce, but I thought I would mention it nonetheless. And with that, on to the thoughts and opinions. This honestly isn't going to take super long because the game's still in early access, and my opinion could change, but right now it's pretty favorable. I first spent my time diving into Mythforce as a single-player endeavor, which proved to be quite the task to rise to, though not impossible. I immediately felt as though the game moved at a slower pace than I was hoping it would, a feeling that I'll credit to my time spent in retro FPS games that are like Doom and Duke Nukem. Those all move so quickly that I wanted Mythforce to move at that same operating speed, but it was simply not to be. From here, the gameplay was pretty straightforward, clear waves of enemies from each room of a dungeon until you get to the end of the floor where a timed wave event with more difficult enemies appear. Clear that challenge and move on to the next floor. There are a total of 7 floors in the currently available dungeon of the game, Battle of the Beast Lord, where the end boss Beastor lies. Now, of course, you must defeat Beastor, and of course, I got nowhere near coming close to it. This game is difficult. As you progress through rooms and floors, you level up your character with new abilities and perks that will wipe upon fail. It's a roguelike after all, but each perk or ability will give the run a different chance for luck and strategy to spring up. Also, you will gain rank and experience towards each character that you play, or I should say class, which will unlock more permanent skills and buffs to help you on your journey. After some time spent with this, I realized that what at first I found to be a bit frustrating with the speed of the game ended up actually being a pleasant experience. The game going slow is only a temporary feeling, and as you sink into the experience of play and leveling up and making up strategies with the time input, I actually found myself less concerned with what I initially felt was going to be a slow ride. Now, after I sunk a healthy dose of time into the game as a solo player, I decided to mix it up a little and play some games with some friends and some randoms, and you know what? Still a pleasant experience. Enemies appeared to become spongier and harder to handle with new additions to the party. You can add up to 3 other players to your Mythforce, which made progression a lot harder to achieve. But where I found myself strategizing for a single player experience before, I was able to start focusing less on certain aspects of my build in multiplayer. For instance, I no longer needed to use glass cannon to met out a ton of damage. I could instead focus on helping my downed teammates and maximizing my stamina, which is fantastic. Weapon drops are for everyone and they're shared, and you can actually use all the weapons that you find because you're not limited by class necessarily. However, the perks that you get with rank and experience will surely apply to that class, and some weapons are much better for other builds. Still, it's an interesting concept, and kind of nice if only for the idea of trying out another weapon on the fly just to see how you feel about it. The game was clearly meant to be played with a group, and admittedly, that is where it shines the brightest. The fusion of styles that each class brings to the table can enhance both the experience of the run, but also your success or failure rate depending on how well your team works together. Just like any multiplayer game, right? I was able to excel pretty far in single player, but I couldn't quite get to the same level with a group, and that's likely due to the enemy difficulty scaling with party additions. Again, this game is difficult. I also suspect that because the game is currently in early access and only contains the one 7-floor dungeon, that perhaps the game's difficulty is inflated a bit so that people don't blow through the entire content that's available quickly, only to never return to it. And if so, it's kind of smart on the devs' behalf. I love the look of the environments and the characters, especially for Battle of the Beast Lord Dungeon, so I look forward to seeing what other 2 dungeons are planned that they're adding in later. Like new enemy types, new bosses. Sign me up, dude. I think the only other thing that I could possibly say about Mythforce at this time is that the music loop they've chosen is kind of dull and it loops constantly, and I really hope that changes. Now, this is kind of the game that just begs for players to use their own music. Personally, I would probably choose my own 80s power metal soundtrack for the full cartoon RP experience. I don't know, maybe that's just me though. I really enjoyed what Mythforce brings to the table, even if it's just kind of a silly multiplayer game that you want to play for a couple of hours with your buds, you know? I think anyone that's looking for that same experience, a light but challenging game to play with your friends, is also going to enjoy this game. At the time of this writing, Mythforce is currently available exclusive to the Epic Games Store on PC. Their roadmap has a hefty dose of updates planned well into spring of next year, including 2 new episodes, a new playable hero, and several new mechanics, enemies, weapons, abilities, and a whole lot more. Check out more information at their website, mythforce.com. And as always, thanks for watching. I appreciate it. I was told that I need to do that whole YouTube thing where people are like, smash that like button and subscribe to the channel or whatever. So, I guess here's my chance to do that.